The alarm clock screamed at 0430 hours, but Maya Chun had been awake for 20 minutes already. She sat on the edge of her narrow bunk in the women's barracks, lacing her standard-issue combat boots with methodical precision. Around her, other soldiers stirred restlessly, some muttering complaints about the early hour. Maya said nothing. She never did. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 5 feet 3 inches and barely 120 pounds, Maya looked like she belonged behind a desk processing paperwork rather than carrying a rifle. Her black hair was always pulled back in regulation style, her uniform pressed but unremarkable. No decorations adorned her chest, no distinctive patches marked her as special operations material. She was, by all appearances, exactly what her personnel file suggested, an average support technician from Nebraska who had enlisted to pay for college. The mess hall buzzed with nervous energy as soldiers grabbed quick breakfast before the day's training exercises. Operation Nightfall was set to begin in 18 hours, and everyone knew what that meant. The most challenging simulation the base had ever attempted would unfold under complete darkness, testing every skill the elite units had spent months perfecting. Maya moved through the serving line quietly, accepting her portion of scrambled eggs and toast without comment. She found an empty table in the corner and ate in silence, occasionally glancing at the animated conversations happening around her. 3 tables away, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was holding court with the other special operations candidates. His voice carried across the room as he described the night vision equipment they'd be using, the sophisticated communication systems, the precision required for the mission. Maya had heard it all before during the briefing. She wasn't supposed to attend. As a communications technician, she was cleared to monitor radio traffic but nothing more. Her job during Operation Nightfall would be to sit in the command bunker, listening to the real soldiers accomplish what she never could. Rodriguez caught sight of her and nudged the soldier next to him. Maya didn't need to hear his words to know what he was saying. The slight shake of his head, the dismissive gesture toward her table, the quiet laughter that followed. She had become accustomed to being the subject of such conversations. In a world where physical dominance often determined respect, her small frame and quiet demeanor made her invisible at best, dismissed at worst. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison entered the mess hall, and the volume dropped noticeably. He moved with the confidence of someone who had spent 2 decades earning his position, his graying temples and lined face telling stories of conflicts most people only read about in newspapers. Harrison commanded respect not through intimidation, but through competence, and every soldier in the room knew it. His eyes swept across the assembled personnel before settling on Rodriguez's table. Operation Nightfall participants. Briefing Room Alpha in 15 minutes, Harrison announced. Final equipment check and mission parameters. His gaze moved across the room methodically, taking inventory of his assets. When his eyes reached Maya's corner table, they paused for just a moment. She looked back steadily, her expression neutral. Harrison nodded almost imperceptibly and continued his visual inspection. Maya finished her breakfast and cleared her tray, moving through the morning routine she had perfected over 18 months of service. She walked to the communications center, a windowless building filled with radio equipment and monitoring stations. Her supervisor, Sergeant Thompson, was already there, checking the systems that would track the night exercise. "Chun, you're on primary monitoring tonight," Thompson said without looking up from his checklist. "Command frequency, emergency backup, and medical channels. Standard protocol, nothing fancy." He handed her a thick manual of procedures and radio codes. "Major Sterling specifically requested you handle the coordination desk. Said you had the steadiest hand on the radio." Maya accepted the assignment without comment, though something in Thompson's tone suggested there was more to the request than routine staffing. Major Sterling was Harrison's second in command, responsible for operational planning and personnel allocation. In the 6 months since her arrival at the base, Maya had worked directly with Sterling exactly twice, both times during equipment failures that required precise communication under pressure. She had performed competently, but unremarkably, or so she thought. The morning passed in equipment checks and system testing. Maya methodically verified each radio frequency, tested backup power systems, and reviewed emergency protocols. Her movements were economical and precise, wasting no motion or time. Other technicians worked around her, preparing for their own roles in the evening's exercise, but Maya remained focused on her assigned tasks. Around noon, she took her regulation lunch break and walked to the base library, a small building that most soldiers ignored in favor of the gym or recreation center. Maya had discovered it during her first week and had visited almost daily since. She chose a table near the military history section and opened a worn paperback novel, the same one she had been reading for 3 weeks. Her reading pace was deliberately slow, each page carefully absorbed rather than quickly consumed. Corporal Williams spotted her from across the room and approached with the casual confidence of someone who had never been told no. Williams was everything Maya was not: tall, athletic, with the kind of natural charisma that drew people into conversations, whether they wanted to participate or not. He had been trying to engage Maya in social interaction since her arrival, interpreting her polite responses as encouragement rather than courtesy. "Exciting day ahead, Chun," Williams said, dropping into the chair across from her without invitation. "Wish I could be out there with the real operators instead of stuck monitoring radio chatter." He leaned back in his chair, projecting the kind of confidence that came from never having been tested under real pressure. Course, some of us weren't cut out for field work anyway. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya looked up from her book, meeting his eyes with the same neutral expression she maintained in most social interactions. "The communication role is important," she said simply. "Without coordination, field operations fail." Williams laughed, though not unkindly. "Always the company line with you. Don't you ever want something more? Adventure, action, proving yourself out there where it matters?" He gestured vaguely toward the window, beyond which lay the training grounds where the special operations teams were conducting final preparations. "I want to do my job well," Maya replied, returning her attention to the book. The conversation was over as far as she was concerned, but William seemed determined to continue. "That's admirable, I guess," he said, his tone suggesting it was. "Anything but tonight's going to be something special." 15 targets scattered across 20 square miles of forest, complete darkness, no backup support once the teams deploy. These guys are going to prove what elite training really means. Maya's fingers paused on the page she was turning, though her expression didn't change. Williams took her stillness as interest and leaned forward conspiratorially. "Rodriguez was telling me about the equipment they're using. Night vision that costs more than most people's cars. Communication systems that can coordinate with satellite feeds. GPS tracking so precise, it can guide them to within inches of their targets." He was warming to his subject now, enjoying what he assumed was her fascination with capabilities beyond her reach. Each team member is carrying about 50 pounds of gear, everything they need to locate and eliminate targets that intelligence. Specialists spent weeks positioning. "Sounds complex," Maya said, closing her book and preparing to leave. She had heard enough about Operation Nightfall to understand its scope and difficulty. What Williams didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she had also heard Major Sterling and Lieutenant Colonel Harrison discussing the exercise during a late-night equipment failure 2 weeks earlier. She had been alone in the communications center, repairing a crucial radio link, when their conversation had carried over an open channel. The simulation is designed to test absolute limits, Sterling had said, his voice tired but determined. If our best people can't handle 15 targets in controlled conditions, they're not ready for what's waiting overseas. Harrison had agreed, adding that the exercise would determine final selections for an upcoming deployment that remained classified even from most of the participants. Maya stood to leave, but Williams wasn't finished with his monologue. "You know what the real challenge is?" he continued, apparently unaware that she was no longer listening. "It's not just the darkness or the terrain. It's the pressure of knowing that everyone's watching, that this one night determines who moves up and who stays behind." He paused, studying her face for some reaction. "Course, that's probably a relief for some people. No pressure when you're not expected to perform anyway." The comment hung in the air between them, its implication clear. Maya shouldered her small backpack and walked toward the exit, leaving William sitting alone at the table. She had endured similar observations countless times during her service, each one delivered with the casual certainty of someone who had never questioned their own assumptions about what strength looked like. The afternoon passed in final preparations and system checks. Maya arrived at the communications center an hour before her shift officially began, wanting to familiarize herself with the specific equipment configuration for the evening's exercise. The main monitoring station was more complex than the standard setup she normally operated, with multiple frequency bands, emergency override systems, and direct links to command personnel who would be observing from a separate facility. Sergeant Thompson briefed her on the evening's protocols with unusual thoroughness, explaining backup procedures and emergency contacts that went far beyond normal training exercise requirements. "This isn't like the usual simulations," he said, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he understood more about Operation Nightfall than he was authorized to discuss. "Command wants every communication logged, every transmission recorded. If something goes wrong out there, they want a complete record of how it happened." As the sun began to set, the base transformed from its daytime routine into something more focused and intense. The special operations teams gathered in the equipment bay, checking weapons, adjusting gear, and conducting final briefings. Maya watched from the communications center window as they loaded into transport vehicles that would carry them to the exercise area. Even from a distance, their confidence was visible in the way they moved, the casual efficiency of professionals who had trained for exactly this moment. Rodriguez climbed into the lead vehicle, his team following with practiced coordination. Maya had observed their training sessions from afar, noting the seamless way they functioned as a unit. Each member had specialized skills that complemented the others, creating a capability that exceeded the sum of its parts. They looked like soldiers from recruitment posters, exactly what people expected special operations personnel to be. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison appeared in the communications center as the last transport vehicle departed. He moved through the room checking equipment and speaking quietly with supervisors, his presence adding gravity to what everyone knew was more than a routine exercise. When he reached Maya's station, he paused and studied the equipment configuration she had prepared. "You've worked these systems before?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Yes, sir," Maya replied. "During the communication failures last month and the emergency drill in March." She gestured to the monitoring setup she had arranged. Primary channels 1 through 6, emergency frequency on 7, medical coordination on 8. All systems tested and functioning normally. Harrison nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Major Sterling requested you specifically for tonight's coordination role. She said you had exceptional situational awareness during the March exercise." He studied Maya's face for a moment, as if weighing something she couldn't see. "This evening's operation is more complex than standard training. The teams will be operating under conditions that simulate real combat stress. Your role may be more important than you realize." Maya met his gaze steadily. "I understand, sir. I'll maintain communication protocols and ensure all transmissions are properly logged." "Good," Harrison said, though something in his tone suggested he was thinking about more than communication protocols. He moved on to inspect other stations, leaving Maya with the distinct impression that Operation Nightfall involved considerations she hadn't been told about. As darkness fell across the base, the communication center settled into the focused quiet of a control room during active operations. Maya's station became the nerve center for all field communications, multiple screens, displaying team positions, equipment status, and mission progress. The exercise had officially begun, and 15 targets waited in the darkness for teams that believed they were ready for anything. The first hour passed without incident. Maya monitored routine check-ins from the 4 teams as they moved through the forest toward their assigned sectors. The radio traffic was professional and calm, exactly what she expected from elite soldiers operating in their element. Team Alpha reported successful navigation to Sector 1. Team Beta confirmed equipment functionality. Team Charlie requested weather updates that Maya provided from meteorological data. Everything proceeded according to plan. But as the teams began engaging with their targets, subtle changes crept into the radio transmissions that Maya was trained to recognize. Stress indicators appeared in voice patterns, longer pauses between transmissions, occasional requests for clarification. That suggested confidence was giving way to uncertainty. The exercise was proving more challenging than the participants had anticipated. "Command Alpha Team," Rodriguez's voice came through her headset, slightly strained despite his attempt to maintain professional composure. "Target acquisition in Sector 1 is more difficult than briefed. Requesting updated intelligence on target positioning." Maya checked her reference materials and responded according to protocol. "Alpha Team, target locations are as briefed. No updates available." She made note of the request in her log, along with the timestamp and tone indicators that suggested Alpha Team was encountering unexpected difficulties. Similar transmissions began coming from the other teams as the night progressed. "Beta Team reported equipment malfunctions that forced them to rely on backup systems. Charlie Team requested medical support for a team member who had suffered a minor injury during navigation. Delta Team, the newest and least experienced unit, seemed to be struggling with basic coordination under the challenging conditions. Maya, maintained her professional demeanor throughout each exchange, providing requested information and coordinating support as needed. But privately, she was beginning to understand why Major Sterling had requested her specifically for this assignment. The communication requirements were becoming more complex as the teams struggled with conditions they hadn't fully prepared for. By the 3rd hour, the situation had deteriorated significantly. Alpha Team had located only 2 of their 4 assigned targets. Beta Team was requesting extraction for their injured team member. Charlie Team had eliminated 3 targets, but was lost in terrain that looked different under night vision than it had during daylight reconnaissance. Delta Team hadn't made contact with any targets and was requesting permission to abort their sector entirely. "This is not going according to plan," Sergeant Thompson muttered, monitoring the overall mission status from his supervisor station. "These are supposed to be our best people." Maya continued her assigned duties, but she was also analyzing the tactical situation with skills she had never demonstrated in her official capacity. The teams were failing not because they lacked training or equipment, but because they were approaching the problem incorrectly. They were relying too heavily on technology that created vulnerabilities in complete darkness, moving in formations that worked well in daylight, but became liabilities when visibility was limited, and communicating in patterns that revealed their positions to any observer with basic signal intelligence training. Major Sterling arrived in the communications center during the 4th hour, her expression grim as she reviewed the mission status reports Maya had been compiling. How many targets have been successfully eliminated? She asked Thompson. 6. Out of 15, Thompson replied, unable to hide his disappointment. At this rate, we'll be lucky to reach half the objective before the exercise time limit expires. Sterling studied the tactical display showing team positions and target locations. What's your assessment of the communication failures? Thompson glanced at Maya before responding. Equipment is functioning normally. The teams are following proper radio protocols. The challenges seem to be tactical rather than technical. Sterling's eyes moved to Maya's station, where detailed logs of every transmission were displayed on multiple screens. Chun, you've been monitoring all team communications. What patterns are you observing? Maya looked up from her console, aware that her response might reveal more analytical capability than her personnel file suggested. The teams are experiencing difficulty adapting their standard operating procedures to the specific conditions of this exercise, she said carefully. The night vision equipment is creating overconfidence in their movement patterns, and their communication timing is revealing their positions to anyone monitoring radio traffic. Sterling's eyebrows rose slightly. Elaborate. Maya hesitated, knowing that her next words would demonstrate knowledge and analytical skills that went far beyond her official training. Alpha Team is moving in diamond formation, which works well for daytime operations, but creates excessive noise signature in dense forest. Beta Team is checking in every 12 minutes, which establishes a predictable pattern. Charlie Team is using full communication protocols for routine updates, which extends their radio signature and creates vulnerability windows. The communication center had grown quiet around them. Other technicians were listening to Maya's analysis with expressions of surprise, clearly hearing capabilities they hadn't known she possessed. Thompson's mouth was slightly open and even. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who had just entered the room, was studying Maya with renewed attention. Continue, Sterling said, her voice neutral but her posture indicating intense interest. Maya looked around the room, suddenly aware that she had attracted attention she had spent months avoiding. But the mission was failing, and soldiers were struggling in conditions that she understood better than they did. The exercise parameters are designed to simulate urban conflict environments where stealth and adaptation matter more than overwhelming firepower, she said, her voice growing more confident. The teams are approaching it like a rural interdiction mission, which creates tactical mismatches that their training didn't address. Harrison stepped closer to Maya's station. What would you recommend? Maya paused, knowing that her answer would change everything about how people saw her. She had spent 18 months being underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked. Speaking now would end that anonymity forever, but it might also help teams that were struggling with challenges she could see clearly. The targets are positioned to reward small unit tactics and individual initiative rather than coordinated team operations, she said finally. Single operators with minimal equipment would be more effective than four-person teams with full gear loads. Night vision creates dependence and reduces natural adaptation to darkness. Radio silence would be more valuable than constant communication. The room was completely silent now. Maya's analysis was not just insightful but demonstrated tactical understanding that went far beyond anything in her official training records. Sterling and Harrison exchanged glances that seemed to communicate something Maya couldn't interpret. Chun, Harrison said slowly, where did you acquire this level of tactical analysis capability? Maya met his gaze steadily, knowing that her answer would determine everything that followed. Independent study and observation, sir. I've been monitoring training exercises for 18 months and analyzing performance patterns. She gestured to her console. Communication provides insight into tactical decision-making. When you listen to enough operations, you begin to understand what works and what doesn't. Sterling leaned against Maya's console, studying the tactical display with new interest. If you were planning this mission, how would you approach it? Maya looked at the screen showing 15 target locations, scattered across terrain she had memorized from countless hours of observation. I would use single operators with minimal equipment, moving independently to avoid pattern recognition. No radio communication except for emergencies. Natural night vision adaptation instead of technological dependence. Target acquisition based on patience and observation rather than aggressive movement. That approach would require exceptional individual skills, Harrison observed. Our teams train for coordinated operations. Yes, sir, Maya agreed. But the exercise parameters seem designed to test individual capability under conditions where coordination becomes a liability rather than an asset. Sterling turned to Harrison with an expression that seemed to confirm a conversation they had been having outside Maya's hearing. Colonel, I think we should consider the alternate approach. Harrison studied Maya for a long moment, his expression thoughtful and calculating. Chun, are you suggesting that you could perform better than the teams currently in the field? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maya understood that her answer would either end her military career or transform it entirely. Around the communication center, every conversation had stopped. Technicians and supervisors were waiting to hear how a small woman from Nebraska would respond to a question that challenged everything they thought they knew about combat capability. I don't know, sir, Maya said honestly. But I believe the tactical approach I describe would be more effective for this specific mission than the methods currently being employed. Sterling and Harrison stepped away from Maya's station and conferred in voices too low for anyone else to hear. Their conversation lasted several minutes, during which Maya continued monitoring the struggling teams while awareness of her changed status rippled through the communication center. When the two officers returned, their expressions suggested decisions had been made. Chun, Sterling said, you're relieved of communication duties. Report to the equipment bay in 15 minutes for mission briefing and gear assignment. Maya stared at her, not immediately comprehending what she was hearing. Ma'am, we're implementing the tactical approach you described, Harrison explained. Single operator, minimal equipment, no radio communication except emergencies. You'll have 1 hour to eliminate the remaining 9 targets. The communication center erupted in surprised conversations as the implications of what they were hearing became clear. Maya would be going into the field to attempt what 4 teams of elite soldiers had been unable to accomplish. Thompson looked stunned. Other technicians were whispering among themselves, and Maya felt the weight of expectations that had never been placed on her before. Sir, she said carefully, I don't have field authorization or combat training certification. You have temporary field authorization as of this moment, Sterling replied. As for training, we'll find out what you're capable of soon enough. She paused, studying Maya's face. Unless you don't think you can handle it? Maya understood that this was more than an assignment. It was a test of everything she had claimed to understand about tactics and capability. Refusing would confirm that her analysis was purely theoretical. Accepting would put her in a position where failure would be public and complete. I can handle it, she said quietly. Sterling nodded. Equipment bay, 15 minutes. We'll brief you on the remaining target locations and provide basic gear. She turned to leave, then paused. Chun, this isn't a training exercise anymore. This is your chance to prove that quiet competence matters more than loud confidence. Maya saved her communication logs and powered down her station, aware that she was closing one chapter of her military service and opening another. Around her, the communication center buzzed with speculation and disbelief. In 15 minutes, she would walk into a situation that would either validate everything she believed about herself or expose her limitations in the most public way possible. But as she walked toward the equipment bay, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in months of service: anticipation rather than resignation. For the first time since her enlistment, Someone was asking her to prove what she could do instead of assuming what she couldn't. The night was about to become far more interesting than anyone had planned. The equipment bay felt different at night, shadows stretching between racks of gear that gleamed dully under fluorescent lights. Maya entered to find Major Sterling, waiting beside a table loaded with equipment that looked nothing like the sophisticated systems the other teams had carried. Instead of the bulky night vision apparatus and communication arrays she had expected, the gear was minimal and deliberately simple. "This is what you asked for," Sterling said, gesturing to the sparse collection. Basic tactical vest sidearm, knife, emergency radio with encryption disabled, and standard issue boots. She picked up a small device that looked like a modified compass. "GPS tracker, so we can monitor your position, but no display screen for you to read. You navigate by instinct and observation." Maya approached the table, running her fingers over equipment that felt more appropriate for a solo hiking trip than a military operation. The tactical vest was lightweight, designed for mobility rather than protection. The sidearm was a standard 9mm pistol with 2 spare magazines. The knife was military issue but unremarkable, the kind carried by every soldier on base. The emergency radio was deliberately primitive, capable of basic transmission, but lacking the encrypted channels and satellite connectivity the teams had been using. "No night vision equipment?" Maya asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "You said natural adaptation would be more effective," Sterling replied. "We're testing that theory." She handed Maya a sealed envelope. "Target locations for the remaining 9 objectives. Memorize them and destroy the information before you deploy. No maps, no GPS guidance, no backup reference materials." Maya opened the envelope and studied the hand-drawn diagrams inside. Each target location was marked with basic landmarks and rough distance estimates, the kind of information that required spatial memory and terrain reading skills rather than technological assistance. She spent 5 minutes studying the positions, creating mental maps that connected the targets to geographical features she had observed during daylight hours. "Questions?" Sterling asked as Maya folded the papers and fed them into a document shredder beside the equipment table. "Time limit?" Maya asked, though she was more concerned with understanding the real parameters of what she was attempting. 1 hour from deployment to extraction point, Sterling said. 9 targets, 20 square miles, complete darkness, no backup support. She paused, studying Maya's face. "The teams that went before you had 4 hours and eliminated 6 targets. You're expected to accomplish in 1 hour what they couldn't manage in 4. Maya understood that the mathematics were deliberately impossible by conventional standards. The mission was designed to demonstrate failure rather than success, which meant approaching it conventionally would guarantee the outcome everyone expected. She stripped off her standard uniform and began putting on the tactical gear, each piece fitting with surprising comfort, despite being issued without specific measurements. "The other teams don't know about this approach," Sterling continued. "They're still in the field attempting to complete their original assignments. Command is monitoring their progress from the observation bunker, but they're not aware that we're implementing an alternate strategy." She handed Maya a small earpiece. "Emergency communication only. If you're injured or compromised, activate. The panic signal and extraction will begin immediately." Maya secured the earpiece and tested its fit, then performed a final equipment check with practiced efficiency. The gear felt strange in its simplicity after months of watching other soldiers prepare with elaborate systems and backup technologies. But it also felt right, as if she was finally working with tools that matched her capabilities rather than trying to adapt to equipment designed for different approaches. "Maya," Sterling said, using her first name for the first time since they had met, "you understand that this mission will be observed and recorded? Whatever happens out there tonight will become part of your permanent service record." "I understand, Major," Maya replied. shouldering the lightweight pack that contained only water, emergency medical supplies, and the communication device. Permission to ask a question? Go ahead. Why are you allowing this? My analysis. Could be wrong, my confidence could be misplaced, and failure would be very public. Maya met Sterling's eyes directly. What makes you think I can accomplish what trained special operations teams couldn't? Sterling was quiet for a moment, studying Maya with an expression that seemed to weigh considerations beyond the immediate. Mission. 3 months ago, during the equipment failure that kept you working through the night, you solved a communication problem that 3 senior technicians had been unable to resolve. You didn't just fix the equipment, you redesigned the signal routing to prevent the same failure from recurring. Maya remembered the night Sterling was referring to, when a storm had damaged primary communication arrays and backup systems had failed to engage properly. She had worked alone for 6 hours, tracing signal pathways and identifying cascade failures that had created systematic breakdowns. The solution had required understanding not just the immediate problem, but the interconnected relationships between multiple systems. 6 weeks ago, Sterling continued, you provided tactical analysis during the simulated convoy exercise that identified 3 ambush points our intelligence teams had missed. You weren't asked for your opinion. You weren't part of the planning process, but your observations were more accurate than assessments from specialists with years of training. Maya hadn't realized that her informal comments to other communication technicians had been passed up the chain of command. She had simply noted patterns in radio traffic that suggested coordination between exercise opponents that didn't match the official briefing materials. 2 weeks ago, Sterling said, you were monitoring communication during the failed night patrol exercise when you identified the tactical errors that were causing team separation and navigation problems. Your recommendations, passed through unofficial channels, helped prevent what could have been a serious training accident. Maya understood now that her 18 months of careful observation and quiet analysis had not gone unnoticed. Someone had been watching her watch others, evaluating her insights and waiting for an opportunity to test whether theoretical understanding could translate into practical capability. The teams that deployed tonight are competent and well-trained, Sterling said. But they're approaching this mission the way they've been taught to approach every mission. You're approaching it differently because you think differently. Sometimes, different is what's needed. Maya nodded, understanding that she was being given an opportunity that had nothing to do with charity and everything to do with capability that had been recognized even when she hadn't realized it herself. I'm ready, Major. Sterling led her out of the equipment bay toward a vehicle that would transport her to the deployment point. The base was quiet, most personnel either sleeping or involved in monitoring the ongoing exercise. Maya climbed into the passenger seat, noting that the driver was a sergeant she didn't recognize, someone who had been specifically assigned to this unscheduled addition to the evening's activities. The drive to the forest perimeter took 20 minutes, during which Sterling briefed Maya on extraction procedures and emergency protocols. The conversation was professional and focused, but Maya detected an underlying tension that suggested this deviation from planned operations was not without risk for Sterling as well. If Maya failed spectacularly, questions would be asked about the decision to deploy an unqualified technician in place of trained special operations personnel. Final question, Sterling said as they approached the deployment point. Are you certain about this approach? No one would question a decision to abort at this point. Maya looked out at the dark forest that stretched beyond the vehicle headlights, thinking about the 9 targets waiting in terrain that 4 teams of elite soldiers had found too challenging to master. She thought about 18 months of being underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. She thought about the tactical analysis she had provided without being asked, and the insights she had developed without formal training. I'm certain, she said. The vehicle stopped at a dirt access road that marked the beginning of the exercise area. Maya climbed out, adjusted her equipment one final time, and looked back at Sterling through the open window. 1 hour, Sterling sighed. Good hunting. Maya turned toward the forest and began walking into darkness so complete that she couldn't see her own feet. Behind her, the vehicle's taillights disappeared as it drove back toward the base, leaving her alone with 9 targets, impossible mathematics, and theory she was about to test under conditions where failure would be measured in missed objectives and damaged reputation. The forest was quieter than she had expected, the kind of deep silence that came from dense tree cover and minimal wind. Maya stopped walking after 50 meters and stood completely still, allowing her eyes to begin adapting to darkness that night vision equipment would have eliminated. She closed her eyes for 2 minutes, then opened them gradually, letting natural vision adjust to available light from stars and distant base illumination. When her adaptation was complete, she could distinguish shapes, terrain changes, and movement patterns that would have been invisible to someone dependent on technological assistance. The forest floor became navigable. Tree branches emerged as obstacles to avoid rather than invisible hazards, and the general geography began to make sense in relation to the target locations she had memorized. Maya began moving toward the first target, using a route that avoided the paths the other teams had taken. She had monitored their radio communications long enough to understand their movement patterns, which meant she could predict areas where they would still be operating and zones that would be clear of activity. Her approach was based on efficiency rather than stealth, accepting that some noise was inevitable but minimizing unnecessary sound through careful foot placement and route selection. The first target appeared after 12 minutes of movement, marked by a reflective panel that would have been visible to night vision equipment, but appeared as barely noticeable variation in texture to natural eyesight. Maya approached from an angle that kept her concealed behind natural cover, studying the target placement and immediate area before moving closer. The elimination method was simple: physical contact with the target panel for a minimum of 3 seconds, long enough to activate internal sensors that would record the successful engagement. Maya reached the panel without triggering any of the motion detectors that surrounded it at obvious approach angles, made contact with the target, and withdrew to plan her route toward the second objective. Target 2 was positioned in more difficult terrain, requiring navigation through a steep ravine that would channel movement into predictable corridors. Maya studied the geography from high ground, identifying an alternate approach that required more physical effort, but avoided the monitoring devices she could see positioned along the obvious routes. She descended into the ravine using handholds and footing that kept her away from sensor coverage, approached the target from below rather than from ground level, and completed the elimination without activating any detection systems. By the time she reached target 3, Maya had been in the field for 28 minutes and was beginning to understand why the other teams had struggled with the mission parameters. Each target was positioned to reward unconventional thinking and punish standard tactical approaches. The exercise designers had created scenarios that tested adaptability and individual initiative rather than coordinated teamwork and technological superiority. Target 3 was the most challenging yet, positioned in an open area with minimal cover and surrounded by sensors that would detect movement from any conventional approach angle. Maya spent 5 minutes observing the target placement before recognizing that the elimination could be accomplished from above, using tree cover to approach the target from an angle the designers hadn't anticipated. She climbed a tall pine tree that overlooked the target area, moving slowly to avoid creating noise or vibration that might trigger ground-based detection systems. From 20 feet above ground level, she could see the target panel and the sensor array that protected it. Maya positioned herself directly above the target and dropped silently onto the panel from above, making contact for the required 3 seconds before rolling clear and disappearing back into forest cover. 3 targets eliminated in 35 minutes, with 25 minutes remaining to locate and eliminate 6 additional objectives. Maya was ahead of the pace required for mission success, but she also understood that the remaining targets would be progressively more difficult to reach and eliminate. The exercise was designed to escalate in complexity, testing whether success at early stages could be maintained under increasing pressure. She moved toward Target 4 with growing confidence in her approach and equipment choices. The minimal gear was proving advantageous rather than limiting, allowing her to move quickly and quietly without the weight and bulk that had slowed the other teams. Natural night vision was providing better environmental awareness than technological assistance would have offered, letting her see terrain features and movement patterns that electronic enhancement might have obscured. Target 4 was positioned near a stream that provided natural sound masking, but also created navigation challenges in complete darkness. Maya followed the watercourse rather than trying to move through dense undergrowth, using the stream bed as a highway that led directly to the target area. The approach was faster than conventional ground movement and left no tracks that could be followed by observers. The target elimination required wading through knee-deep water to reach a panel positioned on a small island in the middle of the stream. Maya entered the water slowly, testing each step to avoid creating splash sounds that might carry to monitoring equipment. The water was cold enough to cause shock, but she controlled her breathing and movement to maintain stealth throughout. The approach. Target 4 was eliminated after 42 minutes of field time, leaving 43 minutes to complete 5 additional objectives. Maya was maintaining the pace required for success, but she was also beginning to feel the physical demands of moving quickly through difficult terrain while maintaining stealth and precision. Her legs were tired from the constant balance and control required for silent movement, and her shoulders ached from the weight of equipment that felt minimal but accumulated fatigue over time. She paused beside the stream to drink water and assess her physical condition, noting that she was perspiring despite the cool night air, and that her heart rate was elevated from sustained effort rather than immediate stress. Maya had trained for endurance events during her civilian life, but military operations created different physical demands that combined strength, agility, and mental focus in ways that pure fitness didn't address. Target 5 was located in terrain that the other teams had avoided entirely, positioned on a rocky slope that offered minimal footing and no concealment from detection systems. Maya studied the approach from multiple angles before recognizing that the target could be reached by moving along the base of the slope rather than attempting to climb directly toward the objective. She traversed the rocky area using handholds and footing that kept her below the sensor coverage zones, approaching the target from an angle that required technical climbing skills but avoided all electronic detection. The target elimination required reaching across a gap between rock faces to make contact with the panel, testing both her physical capability and confidence in her route planning. Target 5 was eliminated after 51 minutes, leaving 9 minutes to complete 4 objectives. Maya was now behind the pace required for total success, but she was also learning that the exercise parameters included options for partial completion that might still demonstrate tactical competence. The mission brief had specified 9 targets, but hadn't indicated whether partial success would be considered failure or simply incomplete achievement. She moved toward Target 6 with the understanding that time pressure was now a factor in her tactical decisions. Maya could no longer afford to spend extensive time planning each approach. She would need to rely on instinct and immediate assessment to maintain any chance of completing the remaining objectives within the specified time limit. Target 6 was positioned in an area where 2 of the original teams were still operating, their radio communications indicating that they were lost and attempting to re-establish their planned route toward objectives they hadn't yet located. Maya could hear them moving through the forest with more noise than they realized, their night vision equipment creating overconfidence in their stealth capabilities. She approached Target 6 by moving parallel to the other team's route, using their noise to mask her own movement while staying far enough away to avoid visual contact. The target was eliminated while the other team was searching for it less than 100 meters away, demonstrating the advantage of unconventional approach techniques over standard tactical procedures. Target 6 was completed after 56 minutes, leaving 4 minutes to eliminate 3 objectives. Maya understood that total mission success was now mathematically impossible, but she also realized that her performance was already exceeding what anyone had expected when she was deployed as an experimental alternative to conventional approaches. She moved toward Target 7 with acceptance that her mission would end with partial rather than complete success, but also with satisfaction that her tactical analysis had been validated under real operational conditions. The theories she had developed through observation and study were proving effective when tested against the same challenges that had defeated better equipped and more extensively trained personnel. Target 7 was positioned in a clearing that offered no concealment and was monitored by motion detection systems that covered all ground-level approaches. Maya circled the area once, looking for unconventional access routes, before recognizing that the target was designed to be impossible for conventional elimination. It was a testing point that measured willingness to accept defeat rather than capability to achieve success. She bypassed Target 7 and moved toward Target 8, choosing to focus her remaining time on objectives that could be accomplished rather than attempting challenges that were designed to demonstrate limitations. The decision reflected tactical prioritization rather than surrender, accepting that resource management was part of successful operations. Target 8 was reached with 2 minutes remaining and was positioned in a location that could be eliminated, with a direct approach that accepted detection as an inevitable consequence. Aya ran toward the target openly, made contact with the panel, and completed the elimination with 90 seconds remaining on her time limit. She moved toward Target 9 at a full run, abandoning stealth entirely in favor of speed. The final target was located within sight of the extraction point, positioned to test whether operators could maintain performance standards while under time pressure and physical fatigue. Maya reached Target 9 with 30 seconds remaining, made contact with the panel, and completed her 8th elimination with 15 seconds to spare. She had achieved 8 of 9 objectives in the specified time limit, exceeding the performance of all 4 original teams, combined and validating tactical approaches that had been dismissed as theoretical rather than practical. The extraction point was a small clearing where a vehicle waited with engine running and lights dimmed. Maya emerged from the forest exactly on schedule, her equipment intact and her mission objectives largely completed. Major Sterling stood beside the vehicle, checking her watch as Maya approached. 8 targets? Sterling asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. 8 confirmed eliminations, Maya replied, her breathing controlled despite the physical exertion of the final sprint. Target 7 was positioned to test acceptance of limitations rather than tactical capability. Sterling nodded, making notes on a tablet that would become part of the official mission record. The other teams are still in the field. Combined total of 6 eliminations in 4 hours and 20 minutes. She looked up at Maya with an expression that seemed to evaluate more than immediate mission results. Your approach proved more effective than conventional methods. Maya climbed into the vehicle, aware that she had just completed something that would change how people saw her capabilities and how she understood her own potential. The mission had been designed to test theoretical understanding against practical application, and the results would become part of discussions about tactical effectiveness and personnel evaluation that extended far beyond one evening's exercise. But as the vehicle drove back toward the base, Maya was thinking less about validation and more about the lessons learned during 60 minutes of independent operation under conditions that had tested every skills she had developed through observation and analysis. She had proven something to herself that was more important than demonstrating capability to others, that careful preparation and unconventional thinking could overcome apparent disadvantages when applied with precision and confidence. The communications center was busy with activity when they returned, personnel monitoring the ongoing efforts of teams that were still struggling with objectives Maya had completed hours earlier. She returned her equipment to the proper storage locations, submitted to a brief medical check that confirmed she had suffered no injuries during the mission, and provided a preliminary verbal report that would be followed by detailed written analysis. "Chun," Sterling said as Maya prepared to return to her quarters for what remained of the night. "Report to my office at 0800 tomorrow for debriefing and discussion of your service record." Maya understood that tomorrow's conversation would address more than mission analysis and tactical evaluation. Her performance tonight had demonstrated capabilities that didn't match her current assignment or rank, which meant decisions would need to be made about how those capabilities could be utilized within military structure and organizational requirements. But those were considerations for tomorrow. Tonight, she had proven that 18 months of careful observation and quiet analysis could translate into operational effectiveness when applied under conditions that tested everything she thought. She understood about tactics, capability, and her own potential for achievement under pressure. Maya walked back to the barracks through a base that was quieter than when she had left it. Most personnel sleeping through operations, they would hear about secondhand rather than experience directly. She had crossed a line that separated theoretical understanding from practical demonstration, and she understood that her military service would be different from this point forward. In her bunk, lying in darkness that no longer seemed complete after an hour of natural night vision adaptation, Maya reviewed the mission that had changed everything about how she saw herself and how others would see her. She had eliminated 8 targets in terrain and had defeated teams with superior equipment and extensive training, proving that careful analysis and unconventional approaches could achieve results that conventional methods couldn't match. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities that she couldn't yet anticipate. But tonight, she had discovered that quiet competence and careful preparation could overcome apparent disadvantages when applied with precision, confidence, and willingness to think differently about problems that others approached with conventional solutions. The mission was complete, the theories were tested, and the results spoke for themselves in ways that would echo through discussions and decisions far beyond the immediate exercise. Maya closed her eyes and slept the deep rest of someone who had proven something important about capability, potential, and the value of being underestimated by people who mistook quiet confidence for lack of ability. Major Sterling's office felt different in the morning light. Walls lined with commendations and photographs that told stories of a career spanning 2 decades and 3 combat deployments. Maya sat in the chair across from Sterling's desk, her hands folded in her lap, waiting for a conversation that would determine the trajectory of everything that followed her success the night before. Sterling reviewed a thick file that had appeared on her desk sometime during the early morning hours. Pages of documents that clearly contained more information than Maya's standard personnel record should have included. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the occasional turn of a page and the distant sounds of morning formation activities outside the window. "Maya Chun," Sterling said finally, closing the file and looking directly at her. "Born in Lincoln, Nebraska. Parents both deceased. Killed in an automobile accident during your freshman year of college. Bachelor's degree in computer science with a minor in mathematics. Graduated summa cum laude from the University of Nebraska. Enlisted in the Army 18 months ago, citing financial hardship and desire to serve." Maya nodded, recognizing the standard biographical information that any superior officer would have access to. But something in Sterling's tone suggested that the file contained details beyond what routine background checks would have revealed. What's interesting, Sterling continued, is what's not in your standard record. She opened the file again and removed several documents that bore classification markings Maya couldn't read from her position. 3 years of graduate work in applied mathematics, specializing in systems analysis and pattern recognition. Thesis research on tactical decision-making under uncertain conditions, completed but never submitted due to family financial crisis. Maya's posture didn't change, but something shifted in her expression that confirmed Sterling was accessing information that went beyond routine personnel documentation. Employment history includes 2 years as a security consultant for a private military contractor, providing analytical support for overseas operations. Sterling read from documents that Maya had never seen assembled in one location. Resignation from that position coincided with your military enlistment, though the reasons for leaving are not specified in available records. Maya understood now that her background had been investigated at levels that indicated someone had been paying attention to her performance long before the previous night's mission. The conversation she thought would focus on tactical analysis and future assignments was actually about revelations that would reshape how everyone understood her qualifications and potential. The really interesting part, Sterling said, setting the classified documents aside and focusing entirely on Maya, is the recommendation letters in your contractor employment file. Written by Colonel James Morrison, currently stationed at the Pentagon in strategic planning. Also Colonel Sarah Banks, now serving as military attaché in Germany. Both letters describe analytical capabilities that go far beyond what your current assignment would suggest. Maya recognized both names, though she hadn't spoken to either officer in over 2 years. Morrison had supervised her work on operational planning analysis, while Banks had requested her insights on force deployment optimization during her time with the contracting company. Both had been mentors who had encouraged her to pursue advanced military service, recommendations she had been unable to follow due to circumstances beyond her control. Colonel Morrison submitted an inquiry about your current status 3 weeks ago, Sterling continued. Apparently, he had been expecting you to apply for officer candidate school or specialized training programs, and was surprised to discover you were serving as a communications technician at a training facility. Maya had wondered whether her former supervisors had noticed her absence from career paths they had expected her to pursue. The financial pressures that had forced her to abandon graduate school and accept immediate military enlistment had also prevented her from pursuing opportunities that required extended training periods without income. Which brings us to last night, Sterling said, closing the file entirely and leaning back in her chair. Your performance during Operation Nightfall was not simply impressive for a communications technician with no field experience. It was impressive for anyone at any level, including the special operations personnel who failed to accomplish what you achieved in a quarter of the time. Maya waited for Sterling to continue, understanding that the conversation was moving toward decisions that would affect her military service in ways she couldn't yet anticipate. The mission results have been reviewed by Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, Base Command Staff, and representatives from Special Operations Training Command, Sterling said. 8 targets eliminated using tactical approaches that demonstrated advanced situational analysis and unconventional problem-solving capabilities. Your success rate exceeded combined team performance by a factor of 4. Maya had known her results were significantly better than the teams that had preceded her, but she hadn't realized the mathematical comparison would be quite so stark. 4 teams of specially trained soldiers had accomplished less in 4 hours than she had managed alone in 1 hour, using equipment they had dismissed as inadequate and methods they had never considered. The question now, Sterling continued, is what we do with someone whose demonstrated capabilities far exceed their current position and whose background suggests qualifications that were never properly evaluated during initial placement. Maya understood that this conversation was about more than performance evaluation. Her success the previous night had revealed discrepancies between her official status and actual qualifications that created administrative challenges for people who made decisions about personnel assignment and career development. "Major," Maya said carefully, "I enlisted for standard service. I wasn't seeking special consideration or accelerated advancement. I needed stable employment and the opportunity to serve." Sterling nodded. "I understand your motivations were practical rather than ambitious. But your performance last night has attracted attention from people who make decisions about special operations recruitment and advanced training opportunities. Your analytical background and demonstrated field capability represent exactly the combination they've been looking for." Maya felt a mixture of anticipation and concern about opportunities that might require commitments she wasn't prepared to make. Her military service had been planned as a stable foundation for building a different kind of life, not as a career path towards specialized roles that might demand years of additional service and training. "What kind of opportunities?" she asked. Sterling removed another document from the file, this one bearing letterhead that Maya recognized as Special Operations Command. "Officer Candidate School with guaranteed placement in intelligence analysis or tactical planning. Alternatively, direct recruitment into specialized training programs that would utilize your analytical capabilities in operational environments." Maya studied the document, noting that both options would extend her military commitment significantly beyond her current enlistment period. The opportunities were precisely what her former supervisors had expected her to pursue, representing career advancement that would utilize her educational background and demonstrated capabilities. "There's also a third option," Sterling said, watching Maya's face carefully. "Assignment to a specialized unit that handles unconventional tactical challenges, reporting directly to Joint Command Structure. Immediate promotion to sergeant, with additional advancement based on performance and completion of required certifications." Maya looked up from the document, recognizing that the third option represented something different from standard career advancement. The language suggested roles that operated outside normal military structure, handling situations that required the kind of analytical and tactical flexibility she had demonstrated during Operation Nightfall. "What would that assignment involve?" Maya asked. "Situations where conventional approaches have failed or are inappropriate," Sterling replied. "Analysis and resolution of tactical challenges that require unconventional thinking and independent operation capability. The work would be varied, unpredictable, and often conducted with minimal backup support." Maya understood that Sterling was describing opportunities that would place her in environments similar to the previous night's mission, but with real rather than simulated consequences. The appeal was immediate and strong, representing exactly the kind of challenging work she had been hoping to find when she left the contracting company. "The decision needs to be made today," Sterling said. "Colonel Morrison is flying in this afternoon to meet with you personally. He's been authorized to make immediate placement decisions based on your preferences and willingness to accept extended service commitments." Maya felt the weight of decisions that would determine not just her immediate future, but the entire direction of her military career. The previous night had been intended as a simple test of tactical theories, but it had become a demonstration that opened possibilities she hadn't anticipated when she enlisted as a communications technician seeking stable employment. "Can I ask what recommendation you would make?" Maya said. Sterling was quiet for a moment, studying Maya with the expression of someone who had spent years evaluating personnel potential and matching capabilities with organizational needs. "Your performance last night demonstrated that you have been significantly underutilized in your current assignment. You have analytical capabilities that are needed in specialized roles, and you have demonstrated field competence that many people never develop despite extensive training." Maya nodded. understanding that Sterling was confirming what she had suspected about her own potential, but had never been positioned to prove. However, Sterling continued, specialized assignments come with costs that go beyond extended service. Commitments. The work is demanding, often dangerous, and typically conducted in isolation from normal military support structure. Success requires psychological resilience that not everyone possesses, regardless of their tactical or analytical capabilities. Maya appreciated Sterling's honesty about challenges that recruitment materials wouldn't emphasize. Her experience with the contracting company had taught her that specialized roles often involved responsibilities and pressures that were difficult to anticipate from outside the operational environment. "How much time do I have to decide?" Maya asked. "Colonel Morrison arrives at 1400 hours, Sterling replied. "You'll have lunch, then meet with him for final discussion and decision. If you accept specialized assignment, you'll be transferred immediately to begin advanced training. If you prefer officer candidate school or standard advancement, those processes will begin within the next 2 weeks. Maya understood that she had approximately 4 hours to make decisions that would reshape her military service and potentially her entire career trajectory. The conversation had moved far beyond anything she had anticipated when she reported for what she thought would be routine mission debriefing. "One more thing," Sterling said, standing to indicate that the formal portion of their meeting was concluding. "Your performance last night is being documented and distributed to training commands as an example of unconventional tactical effectiveness. Whether you accept specialized assignment or not, your methods will be studied and potentially incorporated into training curricula." Maya stood as well, understanding that her military service had already been changed by the previous night's events. Regardless of what decisions she made about future opportunities, her tactical approaches would become part of institutional knowledge, influencing how other soldiers were trained and how similar challenges were addressed in the future. "Thank you for the opportunity, Major," Maya said, though she understood that gratitude was insufficient for what Sterling had provided by allowing her to prove capabilities that might otherwise have remained theoretical. "You earned the opportunity," Sterling replied. "What you do with it is entirely your decision." Maya left Sterling's office with her mind focused on considerations that extended far beyond immediate career advancement. The specialized assignments Sterling had described represented the kind of challenging work she had hoped to find, but they also required commitments that would reshape her entire life plan. She spent the morning walking around the base, observing training activities and daily routines that might soon become part of her past rather than her present. The communications center where she had worked for 18 months looked different now, smaller and more limited than it had seemed before she proved that her capabilities extended far beyond technical support and radio monitoring. Other soldiers nodded respectfully as she passed, word having spread through informal channels about her performance during Operation Nightfall. Maya had become something of a minor celebrity, the communications technician who had accomplished what special operations teams couldn't manage. The attention was uncomfortable, but not entirely unwelcome, representing recognition that her contributions had value beyond what her previous assignments had suggested. Lunch was a solitary affair, Maya choosing a quiet corner of the mess hall, where she could think without interruption. The decision she faced was fundamentally about what kind of military service she wanted to pursue and what kind of person she wanted to become through that service. Standard advancement would provide stable career progression and predictable responsibilities. Specialized assignment would offer challenging work but uncertain conditions and extended commitments. At 1400 hours precisely, Maya reported to the base conference room where Colonel Morrison was waiting. She recognized him immediately despite not having seen him for over 2 years, his bearing and expression unchanged from her memories of working under his supervision at the contracting company. "Sergeant Chun," Morrison said, standing to shake her hand with the formal courtesy that had characterized all their previous interactions. "Congratulations on an impressive performance last night." "Thank you, sir," Maya replied, noting that he had addressed her by rank rather than using the civilian terms that had applied during their previous working relationship. Morrison gestured for her to sit at the conference table, then took a seat across from her with a folder that appeared to contain documentation related to the opportunities Sterling had described earlier in the day. "I've reviewed your mission analysis and tactical performance during Operation Nightfall," Morrison said. "The results confirm what Colonel Banks and I expected when we recommended you for advanced military service 2 years ago. You have analytical and operational capabilities that are needed in specialized roles." Maya nodded, understanding that Morrison's presence indicated that senior leadership was taking her potential seriously enough to invest significant time and resources in recruitment efforts. "The question," Morrison continued, "is whether you're interested in pursuing opportunities that would utilize those capabilities in operational environments that go beyond training exercises and simulated scenarios." Maya met his gaze directly. "What would that involve, specifically?" Morrison opened the folder and removed several documents, spreading them on the table where Maya could see organizational charts and mission descriptions that provided more detail than Sterling's earlier briefing had included. "Joint Special Operations Task Force, reporting directly to Combined Command Structure," Morrison said. "Small teams handling tactical challenges that require analytical problem-solving and unconventional approaches. The work involves both planning and field implementation, often in environments where standard military procedures are insufficient or inappropriate." Maya studied the documents, noting that the organizational structure was designed for flexibility and rapid deployment rather than the hierarchical command systems that characterize most military operations. Recent examples include extraction operations in politically sensitive areas, counterintelligence activities that require analytical deduction, and tactical support for diplomatic missions in unstable regions, Morrison continued. "The work is varied, but it consistently requires the kind of thinking you demonstrated last night." Maya understood that Morrison was describing exactly the kind of challenging, meaningful work she had hoped to find when she left civilian employment for military service. The opportunities represented everything she had been seeking, but they also came with responsibilities and risks that would extend far beyond what she had originally committed to when she enlisted. "Service commitment?" Maya asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Minimum 5 years, with opportunity for extension based on performance and mission requirements," Morrison replied. "Training period approximately 6 months followed by operational assignment that could involve deployment anywhere in the world with minimal advance notice." Maya calculated that accepting the opportunity would extend her military service by over 4 years beyond her current commitment, representing a decision that would determine her life direction for the foreseeable future. "Colonel," Maya said, "I need to understand whether this opportunity is being offered because of my performance last night, or whether there are other factors that influence the decision to recruit me for specialized assignment." Morrison smiled slightly, the first time his expression had deviated from formal professionalism during their conversation. "Both," he said. "Your analytical background and contractor experience indicated potential for specialized work, but potential isn't sufficient for recruitment into operational roles. Last night proved that you can translate analytical capability into practical performance under pressure." Maya appreciated his directness about the combination of factors that had led to the opportunity being offered. Her educational background and work experience had created the foundation, but her tactical performance had provided the demonstration that convinced decision makers to invest in advanced training and specialized assignment. "If I accept," Maya said, "what would happen to my current assignment and the people I work with here?" "Immediate transfer to training facility," Morrison replied. Your current position would be filled through standard replacement procedures. Your former colleagues would be informed that you received advancement opportunities based on demonstrated capability. Maya understood that accepting the specialized assignment would end her current military service entirely, moving her into a different kind of organization with different expectations and requirements. The decision represented not just career advancement, but fundamental change in the nature of her military commitment. Morrison checked his watch, then looked back at Maya with an expression that indicated their conversation was approaching its conclusion. I need a decision within the next hour. Transport to training facility is scheduled for 1,800 hours if you choose to accept the opportunity. Maya felt the pressure of time constraints that forced immediate decision-making about commitments that would affect years of her life. But she also understood that opportunities for challenging, meaningful work were rare and might not be offered again if she declined. Colonel, Maya said, I accept the assignment. Morrison nodded, making notes in his folder that would trigger administrative processes to transfer her immediately into specialized training and operational preparation. Welcome to the task force, Sergeant Chun. Your training begins tomorrow morning. Maya understood that she had just committed to 5 years of military service that would be fundamentally different from anything she had experienced during her 18 months as a communications technician. The decision felt both momentous and natural, representing alignment between her capabilities and opportunities that utilized them effectively. The remainder of the afternoon passed in administrative processing and preparation for transfer to a training facility whose location and curriculum remained classified until she arrived. Maya packed her personal belongings, completed paperwork that formally ended her assignment as a communications technician, and said brief farewells to colleagues, who seemed both surprised and impressed by her sudden advancement. Major Sterling appeared as Maya was loading her belongings into the transport vehicle that would carry her to her new assignment. Any regrets about the decision? Sterling asked. Maya looked back at the base where she had spent 18 months, being underestimated and overlooked, then forward toward opportunities that would challenge every capability she possessed. No regrets, she said. Thank you for the chance to prove what I could do. Sterling nodded. You proved more than I expected. Good luck with whatever comes next. Maya climbed into the vehicle, understanding that she was leaving behind not just a duty assignment, but an entire phase of her military service. The communications technician who had been dismissed as unremarkable was becoming someone whose analytical and tactical capabilities would be utilized in operations that required exactly the kind of unconventional thinking she had demonstrated during Operation Nightfall. As the transport drove away from the base, Maya reflected on the chain of events that had transformed one night's tactical exercise into a career-changing opportunity. Her success had validated theories about capability and potential that had been developing throughout 18 months of careful observation and analysis. But more importantly, she had discovered that being underestimated could be an advantage rather than a limitation, creating opportunities to prove capability under conditions where expectations were minimal and performance could exceed all predictions. The night mission had ended with more than tactical success. It had opened possibilities for service that would utilize every skill she possessed, while challenging her to develop capabilities she didn't yet know she had. The specialized training that waited ahead would be demanding and unpredictable, but it would also be exactly what she had been seeking when she chose military service over civilian alternatives. Maya had found her place in an organization that valued analytical thinking and unconventional approaches, where being different was considered an asset rather than a limitation. The vehicle carried her toward a future that would be shaped by decisions made during 60 minutes of independent operation in darkness, proving that one night's performance could change everything about how capabilities were recognized and opportunities were offered. Maya had earned her advancement through competence demonstrated under pressure, and she was ready for whatever challenges her new assignment would present. The story began spreading before Maya even reached her new training facility. Sergeant Williams posted about it first, a simple message on a military forum that read, "The quiet tech from our comm center just outperformed our entire special ops program in one night." He included no names, no classified details, just the basic facts that someone with minimal training had accomplished what elite teams couldn't. The response was immediate and skeptical. Forum members demanded proof, questioned the story's accuracy, and suggested that Williams was exaggerating a routine training success. But other soldiers from the base began confirming details, adding context about Maya's background and the circumstances that had led to her unexpected deployment. The discussion grew from curious inquiry to intense debate about training methods, personnel evaluation, and the assumptions that determined who was considered capable of challenging assignments. Within a week, the story had reached military podcasts and defense journalism circles. A retired special operations sergeant named Marcus Rodriguez, no relation to the Staff Sergeant Rodriguez who had struggled during Operation Nightfall, devoted an entire episode of his show to discussing unconventional tactical approaches and the danger of underestimating personnel based on appearance or assignment. He never mentioned Maya by name, but his analysis of her methods sparked conversations about training effectiveness and resource utilization that reached decision-makers in multiple branches of the military. The Pentagon's Personnel Evaluation Division received an informal inquiry from congressional staff asking about recruitment and placement procedures that might be overlooking qualified candidates. The inquiry was prompted by defense budget discussions, but it reflected growing awareness that conventional approaches to identifying talent might be missing people whose capabilities didn't match traditional expectations. Maya's former base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, found himself fielding questions from superior officers about training programs and evaluation methods that had failed to identify her potential during 18 months of service. The conversations were professional but pointed, focusing on institutional blindness that might be affecting personnel utilization across multiple facilities and commands. At the Army War College, instructors began incorporating lessons learned from Operation Nightfall into coursework about tactical innovation and adaptive thinking. Maya's approach became a case study in unconventional problem-solving, though her identity remained classified to protect operational security requirements. Students analyzed her methods without knowing her name, learning principles that would influence their own command decisions and future assignments. The Special Operations training community faced uncomfortable questions about selection, criteria, and preparation methods that had produced teams unable to adapt to conditions that a communications technician had mastered in a single night. Training reforms began appearing in curricula across multiple facilities, emphasizing flexibility and individual initiative alongside traditional team coordination and technological proficiency. Major Sterling received a promotion and assignment to a Pentagon position focused on talent identification and unconventional recruitment strategies. Her recommendation reports about Maya's case became foundation documents for new programs designed to identify overlooked capabilities and provide advancement opportunities for personnel whose potential hadn't been recognized through standard evaluation procedures. Colonel Morrison established a recruitment initiative specifically targeting analytically gifted individuals who might not fit traditional special operations profiles. The program sought candidates with diverse educational backgrounds and unconventional skill sets, using Maya's success as proof that effective operators could emerge from unexpected sources when given appropriate opportunities and training. In academic circles, Maya's tactical performance became the subject of scholarly analysis about gender bias in military evaluation, individual versus team effectiveness, and the relationship between technological dependence and operational capability. Research papers were published in defense journals, Policy institutes began recommending evaluation reforms, and her anonymous case study influenced thinking about personnel development across civilian organizations as well as military commands. The most significant change occurred in training methodology itself. Military educators began incorporating shun protocols into their curricula, though few instructors knew the origin of the name. The protocols emphasized natural capability, development over technological reliance, individual problem-solving alongside team coordination, and adaptive thinking in environments where conventional approaches proved inadequate. Maya herself remained largely unaware of the broader impact her performance had created. Her training facility was isolated from external communications, and her instructors focused on developing her capabilities rather than discussing the institutional changes her success had prompted. She spent 6 months mastering advanced tactical skills, analytical techniques, and operational procedures that would prepare her for assignments, requiring exactly the kind of unconventional thinking she had demonstrated during Operation Nightfall. Her first operational deployment came 8 months after the night mission that had changed everything. Maya found herself in Eastern Europe, working with a small team to resolve a hostage situation that conventional forces had been unable to approach safely. The mission required analytical assessment of terrorist psychology, tactical planning for urban environment operations, and individual initiative under conditions where backup support was unavailable. Maya's approach proved as effective in real operations as it had during training exercises. She identified behavioral patterns in the hostage takers that larger analytical teams had missed, developed entry strategies that avoided detection systems other operators couldn't overcome, and coordinated extraction procedures that resulted in successful resolution without casualties. The mission report became another case study, though Maya's identity remained classified. Similar successes followed in assignments across 3 continents. Maya became known within specialized communities as the analyst, an operator whose unconventional methods consistently produced results that traditional approaches couldn't achieve. Her reputation grew quietly, spread through word of mouth among people who worked in classified environments where conventional publicity was impossible. Other women in military service began hearing fragments of her story through informal networks that connected female soldiers across different branches and assignments. The details were often incomplete and sometimes inaccurate, but the core message resonated powerfully. Someone who looked ordinary and held an unremarkable position had proven that capability mattered more than appearance or expectations. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, a supply officer at Fort Bragg, requested transfer to Special Operations training after hearing about Maya's success. Kim had been discouraged from pursuing field assignments because of her small stature and technical background, but Maya's example convinced her that physical appearance didn't determine operational capability. Her transfer was approved, and she excelled in training programs that had previously seemed beyond her reach. Captain Jennifer Walsh, an intelligence analyst in Germany, began developing tactical recommendations that went beyond her assigned duties, inspired by stories of someone who had transformed analytical insights into operational success. Her innovative approaches caught the attention of commanders who offered her advancement opportunities she had never considered pursuing. Across military installations, women who had been overlooked or underestimated began asserting themselves more confidently, requesting challenging assignments and demonstrating capabilities that supervision hadn't recognized. The effect was subtle but measurable, reflected in performance evaluations and advancement statistics that showed increased participation by female personnel in specialized programs. The broader cultural impact extended beyond military circles. Corporate executives began questioning their own assumptions about leadership potential and hidden talent within their organizations. Human resource departments developed new evaluation methods designed to identify capabilities that traditional assessment procedures might miss. Maya's story, filtered through multiple retellings and adapted to civilian contexts, became a symbol of potential that exists in people who don't match conventional expectations. Universities incorporated her case study into business school curricula about organizational behavior and talent management. Students analyzed the institutional failures that had kept Maya in an inappropriate assignment for 18 months. Learning to recognize similar patterns in corporate environments were capable. People might be overlooked due to bias or limited evaluation methods. Management consultants began offering services specifically focused on identifying overlooked talent and developing unconventional capabilities within existing workforces. Maya's success became a selling point for approaches that challenged traditional assumptions about who could handle demanding responsibilities and complex challenges. 3 years after Operation Nightfall, Maya returned to her original base for a classified briefing about new training methods that had been developed based on lessons learned from her tactical innovations. She walked through facilities that looked familiar but felt different, aware that her success had influenced changes in how soldiers were evaluated, trained, and assigned to operational roles. The communication center where she had worked for 18 months now housed equipment and procedures that reflected understanding about the analytical capabilities required for modern military operations. Personnel were trained not just in technical skills, but in tactical assessment and strategic thinking that prepared them for advancement opportunities beyond traditional support roles. Maya met briefly with Major Sterling, now Colonel Sterling, who had returned from the Pentagon to implement recruitment and evaluation reforms at base level. Their conversation was professional but warm, acknowledging shared understanding about potential that had been recognized and utilized effectively. "Any regrets about the path you chose?" Sterling asked as their meeting concluded. Maya considered the question seriously, thinking about the challenging assignments and personal growth that had characterized her 3 years of specialized service. "No regrets," she said. "I found work that matches what I'm capable of doing." Sterling nodded. "You also proved that our evaluation methods needed improvement. That's had impact beyond your individual success." Maya understood that her story had become larger than her personal advancement, representing institutional change that would affect other soldiers whose potential might otherwise remain unrecognized. The night mission that had started as a simple test of tactical theories had become a catalyst for reforms that addressed systematic problems in how military organizations identified and developed talent. As she prepared to leave for her next assignment, Maya reflected on the unexpected ways that one evening's performance had influenced discussions, decisions, and opportunities extending far beyond what she had accomplished personally. Her success had validated the importance of recognizing capability wherever it exists and providing opportunities for people to prove what they can achieve when given appropriate challenges. The specialized unit that had recruited her continued to handle complex assignments requiring unconventional approaches and analytical problem solving. Maya had become a senior member of the team, mentoring new recruits who brought diverse backgrounds and unexpected qualifications to roles that demanded flexibility and innovative thinking. Her influence extended through personnel she had trained, problems she had solved, and methods she had developed during years of operational experience. Maya's approaches had become institutional knowledge, passed to other operators who applied her techniques in situations she would never know about, creating ripple effects that extended far beyond her direct involvement. The quiet communications technician, who had been overlooked and underestimated, had become a catalyst for organizational change that improved how military institutions recognized potential and developed capability. Her legacy was measured not in medals or public recognition, but in opportunities created for others who might otherwise remain invisible to evaluation systems that missed unconventional talent. Maya's story reminded everyone who heard it that real capability often exists in people who don't announce themselves loudly or demand attention for their potential. Sometimes the most effective operators are those who demonstrate their worth through performance rather than promises, proving that steady competence and thoughtful analysis can achieve results that surpass what confident personalities accomplish through conventional approaches. In a world that often celebrates obvious strength and traditional leadership, Maya had shown that quiet capability and careful preparation could overcome apparent disadvantages when applied with precision and intelligence. Her success encouraged others to recognize their own potential and pursue opportunities that might seem beyond their reach, based on other people's expectations. The night mission had ended years ago, but its lessons continued influencing decisions about how organizations identify talent, develop capability, and create advancement opportunities for people whose qualifications might not match traditional expectations. Maya had proven that being underestimated could become an advantage when transformed into motivation for exceptional performance. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.